I'll start. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the四海为学collaborative learning project is based. I want to welcome you to our 22nd event of the四海为学series. Today, we are hosting a roundtable on the Political Zhuangzi. I think for anyone familiar with the Zhuangzi, the political dimensions of this text can certainly be challenging to understand. And we have three excellent speakers who are going to discuss this from somewhat distinct perspectives. Our first speaker will be Professor Michael Nylan from Berkeley. Our second speaker is my colleague at East China Normal University, Professor Chen Yun. And the third speaker is Thorsten Botz-Bornstein from Gulf University. Before getting started and handing things over to our chair, Kateřina Gajdošová, I want to say a few things about the collaborative learning academic forum. The 四海为学collaborative learning project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive, somewhat conventional practices we sometimes find in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks or female peacocks, in jerks, in any form of egoism or other types of self-promotion. We hope to curb aggressive and look at me, I'm smarter than you, or don't I know so much, and similar types of attitudes that we sometimes see in academic exchanges. The 四海为学collaborative learning project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchanges by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So before introducing our chair, I just want to thank Professors Michael Nylan, Chen Yun, and Thorsten Botz-Bornstein once again for participating in this roundtable. Anyone who knows Professor Michael Nylan knows that she does really excellent work, that she's someone you can have these amazing conversations with. Unlike, she has this historical background, she has this philosophical background, and she has this interest and desire, I think, really to engage with the text in ways that not a lot of other people do. So I'm really happy, Professor Michael Nylan, that you're here. Professor Chen Yun is one of the foremost experts on Zhuangzi in mainland China today. He's written a couple books recently about the Zhuangzi and about the political dimensions of the Zhuangzi. If this event had been more publicized on Chinese social media, we would not be able to sustain the participants, because normally any event that Professor Chen Yun is part of will see 500 graduate students. So it's really great, Professor Chen Yun, to have you here. And Professor Thorsten Botz-Bornstein, we've never met before, but I did read your book and I've been looking at your website and I'm really fascinated with your work. So it's really very great that you can be part of this project and part of this roundtable today. So now I want to hand things over to our chair, Kateřina Gajdošová. Kateřina is a researcher and lecturer at the Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic, where she got an MA in philosophy and French philology and a PhD in sinology. Her research focuses on early Chinese and Greek philosophy, mainly from the perspective of comparative cosmology and ontology. She also works on translations of books on philosophy and history of science into Czech. And also, Kateřina, feel free to be part of this roundtable, right, to engage in the discussion. So I'll hand things over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much first for including us young scholars, or not so young, maybe early career scholars from weird countries such as Central European Czech Republic, and stuff. So it's very good of you to include us in the debate with such great scholars. So each of our presenters will have 15 minutes for their presentation, and followed by 15 minutes discussion with other roundtable members. And in the end, we have 30 minutes general discussions where everyone can join in. If you have any questions, you can also write in the chat box. We can pick them up in the end. So let me first introduce Professor Michael Nylan, who does not need much introduction, as I'm sure. She's one of the greatest scholars on early China, author of an endless list of seminal works in history of pre-imperial and early imperial China, and a host of authoritative translations of fundamental texts. She currently focuses on the political theories and practices of the early empires, where she finds, in her own words, abundant evidence that the ancients were in better shape than we are in the modern world. At present, Professor Nylan teaches courses at the graduate and undergraduate level on conceptions of the body and body politics, on the environment and environmental ethics, and on the local administration outside of the capital. All these topics she teaches from both received and excavated texts. Her latest works include a huge translation of the classic of documents, and also the work with the title The Air We Breathe, The World We Want, which is a study in the politics of the common good in early China. Without further ado, I pass the microphone to Professor Nylan.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let me begin by saying I was trained by people who meant their writings to provoke. And so what I will try to do is get us out of our old ways. Not too long ago, I was working with an undergraduate and we invent these research projects for them. And for this undergraduate, I said, go through every piece written in English up to, this was 2 years ago or so, and tell me what passages in the Zhuangzi they focus on. I found, he found, after engaging in quite a bit of work, that basically it's the same 5 anecdotes from the Zhuangzi. And then people would add in maybe 1 or 2 more if we were lucky. And so what they are is the happy fish, the utility of the useless, the giant bird that turns into a giant fish, and you can figure out where I'm going. Where I'm going is that we really haven't thought very hard about the Zhuangzi as a whole. Recently I undertook a project with a graduate student of mine, Heng Yin, to read the Zhuangzi backwards. Backwards because that would get us, if we got too tired out, not to the inner chapters, which I think a lot of commentary, too much commentary, has already been devoted to. So anyway, let me begin with this. And my first provocation is Zhuangzi was no philosopher. There were no philosophers in the early period. I'm a historian. There were certainly people who thought deeply about life's issues. And that, of course, is what the classical Greek philosophers were thinking about too. However, they did not engage in any of the questions that much of modern philosophy seems to be interested in, and that's one obvious reason why so many departments refuse to speak of the Chinese as philosophers. There are, if you're a historian, 3 ways to read any text. You can try to read it as best you can in the context in which it was written. For me, that would be late Zhangguo through early Western Han. That's when we think the compilation came together. And so I believe one cannot read Zhuangzi without referring to the other texts of the time. However, another way to read the Zhuangzi is through later traditions, and my colleague Mark Csikszentmihalyi is engaged in that. How many Zhuangzis do we have in later traditions? And the third way that we can read any text like the Zhuangzi is we can read him through our modern preoccupations. And here I'd like to make a break. Because it seems modern preoccupations begin with the early colonial period, always to involve nationalist narratives. And those nationalist narratives posit continuities that I think we have no evidence for and abundant counter evidence against. All of these are good ways to read. I'm a historian, and I think I prefer what I think of as the radical Zhuangzi, the Zhuangzi in his own time period, because if we follow Yearly's ideas, all masters are masters because they propose radical things that their followers then try to water down. Because their proposals are far too demanding. So anyway, I prefer thinking about the radical Zhuangzi, and I'll get back to that. But I couldn't care less what readings one is conducting, as long as one is very specific about the time and place one is reading the Zhuangzi from. I guess another point I'd like to make is I don't find, unlike most of my colleagues, many abstractions in the Zhuangzi. I'm going to take one that people love, and I'm going to say why I don't think it's there in the way they think it's there. There is the abstraction shu wu. Everyone loves emptiness and the void, okay? Except nobody can really tell what it actually means. I'm a believer in a proposition put forward first for classical Greece, not for classical China, that philosophers, if we want, or thinkers or political advisors, as I prefer, took the medical ideas they had about the body and then talked about their ideas. And certainly in classical Greece, Brooke Holmes has shown that the idea of emptiness refers to the empty cavity in which the unseen organ systems are housed, so that it means the invisible place where operations take place, but it certainly is no abstraction. I think if one goes back to the Zhuangzi, one can probably make a parallel move. And certainly in the early texts, a lot of this Wu and Yo language, which people love, being and nothingness, is simply what is seen and what cannot be seen. And that's very clear if you look at texts from the time period. There's no, in most cases, Tao out there. There are lots of little Tao, ways of operation. And I believe it's Zhuangzi's early task, the radical Zhuangzi's early task, to clarify for us how we should move. I think that another thing that as a historian I know is that our willingness to latch on to single words or phrases as keys to the whole text simply ignores the fact of manuscript culture. All of these texts were transcribed and then edited, often by people, usually by people who were not interested in verbatim transcription. So what we should be looking for, I will argue, for the radical Zhuangzi is major themes in the text, not specific a word here or there that intrigues us. I mean, if we can solve the intrigue, great, but it's unlikely. If we're talking about larger theories, for me, it's obvious that the Zhuangzi is about how to keep whole and intact one's body in a politically fraught environment. After all, chapter 4 and many other chapters I could name are all about being in the world of men and not finding it easy to avoid execution. I think that is the central problematique. And one reason I think there's quite a lot of talk about Cheng in the Zhuangzi is because Cheng in the early period is always glossed as Chen, to keep whole and intact. As far as I'm concerned, there's no preoccupation with authenticity, agency, sincerity, as these are modern theories. One can read them into the Zhuangzi. I don't have any problem with that. But if we consult Raymond Williams' key words, these are all words that became important to us very late in time in the modern period. I think that I would like where we see a phrase we just cannot get beyond, to have us go back to texts of the time to look at how we will translate them. A central theme of Zhuangzi is how to operate always with inadequate knowledge of the situation at hand. We are always wandering in a daze rather than free and easy wandering. The only other use of xiaoyao that exists in the early texts is when Confucius in old age comes to the door and he cannot even recognize one of his own disciples, Zigong. He is in a daze, he is befuddled, he is bewildered. So I think it's very important for me, not for others, to take seriously the central proposition. Zhuangzi wants us to have less ego because none of us have the full picture. Having less ego ensures that we will not be know-it-alls who irritate all of our colleagues. For me, it's as simple as that. And the passage that I particularly love in the Zhuangzi, as in the Shanmu chapter, has Zhuangzi going, go figure. I can't figure it out. And now we proceed from here. So that is what I think the radical Zhuangzi is asking of us. To proceed with less ego, to understand we don't know very much. We should gather all the clues we can about the situation at hand. And no matter how many clues we gather and how carefully we listen to others, we will be missing important parts of the picture. That is, for me, what the first anecdote, the giant bird who turns into a fish. These are gigantic creatures of immense power. And what Zhuangzi tells us is they don't see a thing more than we do. All they see is blue. Once we realize that this should suffice for us to go through living, seeing partially, acting hesitantly, but acting when we need to, then the plenitude of existence opens out before us. And that, I think, is plenty for me. I stop there.
Thank you, Professor Nylan. I will first ask our co-discussants if whether they have any comments.
No comments.
No comments.
Perhaps Professor Chen.
Professor Chen.
Okay. Thanks, Nylan. Thanks, Kateřina. Your report make us realize the distance between what Zhuangzi himself thought and what we understand Zhuangzi to be, and not to impose our understanding of Zhuangzi on Zhuangzi. But I think that Zhuangzi can
No,
be
I'm
understood.
sorry. May I stop you right there? Of course we impose. May I stop you right there?
No, can you hear me?
Yes, but may I stop you? It's not
Oh,
possible
okay.
for us not to impose our own ideas. We are
okay.
limited creatures too.
What I interested in is Chen and Zheng in Zhuangzi. I think the Chen and Zheng is essential to Zhuangzi. But how to understanding the Chen Ren and the Zheng Ren in Zhuangzi? So I think this is a philosophical question. If we back to the historical context, in Mencius, we can find he divided human being in two kinds of person. One is 大体 and 小体. Follow his 大体 is 小人. Follow his 大体 is 大人, big person, a great person. But follow his 小体 is just 小人. This is thing where that Zhuangzi want to reflect it. Sorry, I'm English is poor. I think the Chen Ren just is a who being, not only including the
Professor Chen, I'm afraid we lost you.
Perhaps in the moment, while he's recovering.
Mhm.
I think that my own belief is, first of all, there isn't a Zhuangzi. This is a compilation of texts that come together under a name, and yet there is some coherence here. So I'm not looking for philosophical consistency in these epithets, because I don't believe that's necessary to understand the main ideas in the Zhuangzi. In other words, I think that the modern propensity among academics is to make finer and finer distinctions on everything. But it's a far more radical Zhuangzi to say, what are the main ideas of these essays that have been brought under the name of Zhuangzi? And I believe that Zhuangzi thinks, as I believe Mencius does, that all of the human proclivities are important. Some of them are more easily dealt with by members of the governing elite. They have access to food and sex. And what they need cultivation in is courage. I think that's why we see in the Mencius such an emphasis on courage. I think Zhuangzi is, though he was lumped together with Mencius by Xunzi, is really quite different. He thinks, I think, that we are by turns fearful and overly self-confident. And I think he would like to see us introduce a measure of balance in our lives. Sorry, we lost you, Professor Chen, so I went ahead and started answering.
Professor Chen, do you want to react to that?
Yes, I agree with Nylan, but sometimes I think it's hard for us to go back to the original Zhuangzi. And for me, what Zhuangzi mean to me is just as important as how Zhuangzi himself think.
I think I've made it very plain that you can do that, and it doesn't bother me one bit. It's an equally valid project, but to me, I'm more interested in seeing what Zhuangzi meant in an early period because it's more demanding. It's more historically accurate. I am, after all, a historian.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I'll ask Professor Botz-Bornstein whether he wants to react or at least make a comment.
Yes, I mean, so I could start saying I'm a philosopher. You said I'm a historian. So for my, I can just try to find some things that I can relate to most clearly. It was certainly what you said at the end that we have to act when we need to and how we need to, and this rhymes with the sentences at the end of the outline that you sent about the luck in Chen. Now I will talk about Chen. I will try to in my presentation so that we flourish and with luck. And I think that is important here, that the contingency comes in. There is nothing, there are no rules. There is no necessity, but we are just moving and somehow find out what has to be done in the moment. So I think this reflects this pragmatic attitude, though it is not clear pragmatism, one cannot say that, but it's a certain philosophical attitude that is expressed here. So I found that interesting.
In a way, if we're going to be talking about modern readings, I think Zhuangzi comes very close to the 4 women philosophers in Oxford. They were responding against the way they had been trained, which was to be rationalists and to believe that the world operates by rationalism. And these 4 philosophers who were trained in the interwar year, well, during World War II, Iris Murdoch, Philippa Foot, Elizabeth Anscombe, and Mary Midgley all said to their teachers, "That's not the world I inhabit." And I think that was a very interesting intervention. in philosophy that took place at a specific point in time. And I suspect that Zhuangzi is doing something like that, saying to us that the world as portrayed with these high-sounding principles is not the world he inhabits. And of course, here I'm just using Zhuangzi as a catch-all phrase for all of the compilers of various chapters that now compose the Zhuangzi. But luck is a big deal, and I think Zhuangzi knows it. None of us will survive without luck.
So maybe we can continue this debate after all the presentations are made, and now I would like to pass on to Professor Chen, if you allow me. Professor Chen Yun is a professor of Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University in Shanghai. His main research fields are Christian philosophy, Taoist philosophy, also Wang Fuju's philosophy, classical political philosophy. He's one of the greatest mainland scholars on Zhuangzi, as it has been said. Professor Chen has written a number of books and more than 100 academic papers. His main publications include, for example, the civilizational approach to the philosophy of history in 3 volumes, recently published. Many volumes on the philosophy of the Zhuangzi. The essence of Zhuangzi philosophy, for example, thinking freedom and interpretation of wandering far and unfettered in the book of Zhuangzi. And perhaps the most recent book, The Balance Between Heaven and Man, Text, Structure, and Thoughts in the Zhuangzi's Inner Chapters. Professor Chen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I share my screen. How to? Sorry, I can't. I can't share my screen. Paul.
Yeah. 我把你作为 host 应该是可以 share。应该是下面中间有一个 share screen， 点一下应该就可以。
但是我现在好像整个就找不到它。
就是 Zoom 点一下，就是最下面，然后有最下面中间有一个叫 share screen， 应该是绿色的。
就整个就感觉没有了，就是我这个
你点 Zoom， 你点那个 video。
不是我这整个屏幕好像就感觉就没有了，就是那我是不是要重新进来一次呢？
OK， 也可以试一下。Sorry, usually there's. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Did Professor Chen send you his presentation so that you can share it from your?
No, actually, I don't have it. Yeah, but if he
so
sent
we
it,
lost him. It seems so.
Here, I can ask him to send it to me as well. Should be joining. It says he's joining, but maybe I'll kick him out again. Or maybe we can also just switch. If you don't mind, Professor. Oh wait, let's try Professor Chen Yun again. He's signing in a different name. Sorry, normally there's no problem with this. I actually set it up so I don't have to make people co-host, but sometimes in China, Zoom gets a little bit tricky, so that might be part of the issue here. Hey, Chen 老师。Yeah， 能看到。
看得到吗？
看得到。
看到 ，OK。
好，谢谢。
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chen.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Kateřina. My topic is Dao will be torn apart by the word and the death of chaos, according to understanding the Zhuangzi political thought. I will divide into 3 parts to start my my topic. A, the differentiation of the Dao, governance by two, and the shifting paradigm of the order. The shift in the paradigm of the order proposed by Ouyang Xiu and Eric Workling's theory of the ecumenic age complement each other in a sense and can provide a possible way forward in the understanding of the Zhuangzi political thoughts. In Ouyang Xiu's term, the era in which the Zhuangzi lived was orderly change from governance by one to governance by two. To some extent, this can be regarded as the order similar to that depicted by Eric Workling. He depicted a transition from the undifferentiated cosmological kinship order of governance and education to the ecumenic age of separation between power and spirituality. The word on heaven characterized this transition with the differentiation between sin and ming, and also the separation between Shen and Wang. The divine and the enlightened corresponded to the position of heaven and earth, corresponding to two different domains of order, and these two major areas of order have the same connotation as the human nobility, 人爵, and the heavenly nobility, 天爵, distinguished by Mencius. In the times of the Sui dynasty, rulers was seen as the unity of the monarch and the shaman, or the unity of the official and the teacher. They hold both ruling power and education authority, function as divine kings with a divine order. Monopolizing the right to communicate with heaven. As leader of the clan and their collective way of life, they possess the dual representation role. They survived as representative of heaven for human city and represented human society for heaven. However, after the end of Sui dynasty, rulers become merely one rank or one position in political society. As a representative of the early order, their highest potential was to become enlightened rulers, Mingwang. Enlightened implied a dual meaning of self-awareness, recognizing not only the limitation of the ruler ruling a specific society as an individual, but also the limitation of the ruling authority itself. Unlike kings, the siege son was not subordinate to or limited to by a specific society or specific area. Thus, they could not be understood from the perspective of human honors. The siege representative heavenly honor, embodying its spirit of education. The essence of the sun lies in creation. This creation is relative to ability to initiate a new era of order, while the essence of king lies in narration, the ability to maintain a specific social order. The core of the sun's sanctity lies in his direct access to the heaven without intermediaries, and he survived as the direct interpreter of the heaven, whereas the ruler's access to the Tao must be meditated through sun and the people. Part B, the death of chaos and the differentiation of the Tao. The background of the death of chaos signified the end of the primordial order of the governance by one in the context of classic Chinese thought implies the termination of the exemplary order of the emperor and the king. However, the core of both emperor and the kingly order was to symbolize the human society as a microcosm, establish the harmony between the governance order, the life order, and the cosmic rhythm as a legitimate basis of governance. This cosmic rhythm was manifested through celestial movement, seasonal change, alternation of day and night, and the growth of flora and fauna. Governance by one implied that undifferentiated governance and education are integrated into this cosmic rhythm. However, the death of chaos signified that the virtue of the emperor and the ritual of the king are no longer effective. The dawn of the new epoch can only begin with the death of chaos, where the human past established its own rhythm and rulers no longer aligned with natural rhythm. The mechanism of power and the logic of spirit become two distinct model exclusive to human being, not in nature, nor in union with a doll. They maintained a tension balance governed in a non-interference manner, become the most important approach to maintain this structural tension and the balance between heaven and humanity. The logic of power was no interference with the entitlement ruler as its highest subject. Yet the highest quality was xuande, which remained concealed in the background, emphasized counsel, assistance, and guidance rather than domination, control, and protection. How to respond to the new situation of the governance by two, the Zhuangzi development two dimension of human nature, the political ethical dimension and the non-political ethical dimension. That is the spiritual dimension. We can see an understanding of the two dimensions of human nature. One is living as a human being, as an individual in a political ethical society, in obedience to the Creator's creation. The other is to travel in one chi between the heaven and earth, which means communicate with the spirit of heaven and earth in his honest. That is, it has a sacred agreement with the transcendent way of heaven. This lifestyle based on pure spirituality is non-political and non-ethical. It transcends any organizational and mobilization mechanism that led people to a collectivist form of existing, but it's only open to the soul and the way of heaven. The tension and balance between the two dimensions of human nature is the existential truth. Heaven and man does not compete, and authentic man, Zhenren, is one who understands this truth and carries it out in his own life. If he favors the way of the heaven too much and forgets the way of man, then he is a deformed man, Zhiren, and he will suffer from the 人道之患. If he favors the way of man too much and forgets the way of heaven, then he will suffer from the 阴阳之患. The Zhuangzi does not regard participation in ruler as the highest form of human identity. Rather, his claim is that ruling activity must make room for human spiritual life. He reorganized the differentiated Sheng and Wang in terms of Nei and Wei, which is what is meant by the so-called Nei Sheng Wei Wang. Part C, the two types of chaos and the Zhuangzi's choice. Both the Yingdi Wang and the Tiandi chapter found in provide a metaphor of chaos. If the medical chaos in the former implies the end of the order of governance by one, that is a differentiation of the primordial order experience. Then the latter conveys a different implication. The old man of the Han Yin Jun and Confucius have different understanding of chaos. For the old man of Han Yin, to have mechanism but not to use them means that even though the primordial order of experience had become differentiated and chaos have died. Following his thought, the reconstruction of the order was written to the primordial order of experience, back to the undifferentiated state of chaos before its death. Therefore, for the old man of Han Yin, order was the antithesis of chaos. Arrival of order, accompanied by the death of chaos, was inherently enigmatic. However, the chaotic routine of the old man of Han Yin comes with a new cost. The production of a new obligation between civilization and non-civilization, order and disorder, and rule and no rule. In the spiritual order, what the old man of Han Yin pursued as the tranquility of the spirit, free from mechanical and mental interference, was not the tranquility advocated in the Dazhongshi, which involved experiences social disorder and return to the tranquility. Rather, it advocated escape from disorder. Therefore, the idea chaos in his mind was located in the undifferentiated state of heaven and earth, rather than the time after their division. Confucius' criticism of the old man of Han Yin contained two aspects. Firstly, recognizing the one but not knowing the two. Secondly, governing the internal but not governing the external. The one referred to the undifferentiated permanent one, where there is no distinction between heaven and earth, nor between the Tao and sins, or between order and choice. The old man of Han Yin and Lao Dan was infatuated with the primal one. But this is not Zhuangzi's choice. The difference of the divine and enlightenment, Shen Wang, since it differentiates what under the heaven ultimate belong to differentiation between heaven and humanity. Therefore, Zhuangzi's consideration of order does not aim to eliminate this differentiation, but take it as a premise to understand what is done by heaven and also what is to be done by man. That is utmost. In other words, understanding the differentiation between heaven and humanity is the highest form of knowledge and the chief balance where heaven and humanity do not surprise each other. This is the highest wisdom and the most feasible order paradigm under the parting of the governance by two. This is what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. Does any of the discussants have anything to say? I would be very much interested in the direction of Professor Nylan to this distinction governance by one, governance by two, and whether this shift actually took place at that given time, whether you see the signs of it in the Zhuangzi.
I speak frankly. I don't think we have evidence for this kind of huge shift, which implies huge continuities. But I am extremely interested in Professor Chen's idea that the separation between what is done by heaven and what is done by human beings. And I wonder and I just wasn't quite clear. Does Zhuangzi think we're supposed to do something about the governance by heaven, or does that take care of itself? If it takes care of itself, then clearly we are to realize what we can and cannot do in the human sphere and proceed accordingly. I just would like to ask that point of clarification. Because of course, thinkers can posit events happening in the distant past that didn't happen. And sometimes they even know they didn't happen. There's a wonderful line in the Huainanzi where it says, if you want to get authority for what you're doing, you'll claim it's got an earlier and earlier reference in history. So I think we should think of them as sophisticated when they talk about the distant past. But I think Professor Chen is really onto something when he is talking about how Zhuangzi divides the heaven and the human. I hope that was clear. So my question concerns that.
Professor Chen?
Yes. Thank you very much. I think the most important thing is how to understand heaven, the heaven way. Heaven is not an entity, but a realm outside of our abilities that has a way of operating that is inactive and natural. What's more, heaven is what we can do nothing. I think this is what Zhuangzi's 10. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. I will ask Professor Botz-Bornstein whether he wants to add his comments.
Yes, I mean, from my point of view, I can always only look for points that I can relate to. I mean, it's interesting, this separation between power and spirituality, and that society is in a microcosm, and I guess the heaven is the macrocosm, and the two things have to be integrated. We have the human and the spiritual dimension. We have heaven and earth. But as I always understand the Zhuangzi, there comes the moment of chaotification, where things are not that harmonious, so heaven and man should not compete. But at some point it comes back to this undifferentiated state of chaos, because there is not, and I think Professor Chen said this, there is not just tranquility, which would in other religions it would be called quietude. I take this from Toshihiko Izutsu in his book, where he compares Taoism with Sufism. This is very important. Also this intoxication that Professor Chen mentioned is interesting. Is it a permanent intoxication or is it a temporary intoxication? So I just wonder, when I listen to this, how much does it go for? Does it strive to establish a complete harmony, or is there not always the idea that we have to go back to chaos because things do not entirely fit, but we have to question things again and again all over? This is my comment.
Thank you very much. Professor Chen, do you want to react to that?
Yeah. Thank you. I think precisely the unity of the heaven and man that impossible. So I emphasize the tension and balance between heaven and humanity. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. We can continue the discussion in final stages of the roundtable. So let me now introduce Professor Botz-Bornstein, who is a professor of philosophy at the Gulf University for Science and Technology in Kuwait. He's originally from Germany, but he graduated in philosophy from Paris Sorbonne and received his PhD in Oxford. He also obtained his habilitation, which is a higher academic degree at École des études anciennes sociales in Paris. Professor Botz-Bornstein did research on Shiitake terror in Kyoto, Japan, or also worked in the interdisciplinary research center Cognition and Language at Zhejiang University. Really traveled the whole academic world, as I've observed in his CV. He himself describes his philosophy as neo-organicism. He develops on the existing organicist philosophies, post-structuralist philosophies, for example, on Derrida, Bakhtin, Bergson, Gadamer's hermeneutics of being. He's the author of many very interesting books and hundreds of academic papers. And his recent publications include, for example, How Much Religion is Good for Us if a Religion Were a Game. This one is forthcoming together. Or Taoism, Dendism, and Political Correctness, the topic that we'll be talking about today. Or a trilogy on alternative liberalism, very interesting titles. So Professor Botz-Bornstein, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. So hello from Kuwait. It's very early here. I see there is a Kuwaitian name in the public. I don't know him. He's not my student. I wonder who he is. He cannot be in Kuwait because at 5 in the morning, I think nobody would wake up. But if we are lucky, you can see behind me the sunrise on the Arabian Gulf, or that you know perhaps better as Persian Gulf. So I talk about the politics in the Zhuangzi and the notion of the self. Partly I take a few elements from what I said before about political correctness in my book, but I tried to do something new, to add something else about this on the self. But first, so it is about political correctness, which you know what it is. It's a measure that attempts to prevent expressions that could offend or marginalize certain people. And it aims to spread justice and fairness by making the public sensitive towards vulnerable parts of the population. And then more recently, we have to add the term woke, which is similar. It's not entirely the same. One can sometimes wokeness can even be against political correctness. But so you also know what woke is. It has been coined by African Americans in the 1930s, and it's mindful of racial inequalities. And it has now come to signify an awareness about any sort of discrimination. Now, what is important here is the self, the notion of the self, especially the gendered self. And language must be corrected according to certain rules that are supposed to establish the self in the correct way. In my view, it's a very Western approach. Western thought is obsessed with the power of language. There are essentializations. The word to essentialize, for me, it's very American when you talk to graduate students already 20 years ago. Then you shouldn't essentialize anything. Now, does it mean that there are no essences in the world? I would doubt that. Maybe there are some essences around, but there are wrong essences and they need to be corrected, and we can do that by modifying language. And this also applies to the self. So from a Taoist point of view, the PC invents new terms, but it does so not in order to overcome essentialist thinking, but it creates new essences. And for Zhuangzi, human reason sets formal limitations, and the mind puts essences in order so that something solid can be established around us. So the mind constructs a reality, but it's not the real reality. And one can say that political correctness or wokeness is part of this project that essentializes reality through words. Both notions, PC and woke, they aim to support people's self, to let them live their true self, their true identity, their authentic self. And so affirming your real self, your real gender, for example, that is about affirming your authenticity. But at the same time, there is the idea of emptying yourself of everything that is wrong, of the false conventions. So you see, I'm a bit obsessed now in my new research with the term of the idea of emptying, with sunyata, the emptiness. And once things are emptied, do they have to be filled with something else, with something new that is better, or does it stay empty? So here certainly the idea with PC and wokeness is that once you have emptied your fake self, then you will fill it with more authentic pronouns that will affirm yourself. So I want to relate this to Taoism by looking at the concept of Cheng that also Professor Nylan has mentioned, because it's the sincerity on which our self should ideally be based. Cheng is a Confucian idea. It roughly overlaps with this idea that our actions must involve our inner emotions, that our self should overlap with our emotional self. So simply playing your role, pretending is not enough, but your heart must be involved. Then you have real virtues, so the virtues must be sincerely assumed. And this is why Western gender politics very similarly talks about rules. And as I said in my book, it's therefore kindred to Confucianism. So the word Cheng, you know very well, Legge had already translated it as sincerity, and that was accepted. There is also perfection, as truth, realness. This is very interesting. Integrity are translations. In any case, it's always something ethical and ontological. Joseph Needham said that we cannot translate it. We should just keep it the way it is, like Tao, keep it in Chinese. But so somebody who has Cheng, the great man, as he said in the Su Wu Gui, he has accomplishment, and he does not look for it. This sincerity is not something that one looks for. If one looks for it, consciously, then something is already wrong. So I think this rhymes with what Professor Nylan said about the acting when we need to, that it comes naturally. Now, this is why, since Taoism is one of the reasons why it is critical of this idea of sincerity. One can be overly sincere, and one should cleanse oneself of this. You hear the call for prayer now. I hope it doesn't interfere with the audio here. For example, Yezi, you know, this story, his problem was that he has not gotten rid of his sincerity. He had too much will to do good, but he should simply do good, not want to do it. He should help others naturally without thinking about it. So again, it doesn't mean that one should be authentic, because again, that will mean that there is an ideal self that exists, but it doesn't exist. It exists only at the moment it is enacted. It does not exist as an ideal, as a concept. One does not do good because one has an essentially good self, because one has a good essence, but simply because one is doing good. So this is why the Zhuangzi recommends that one should have no self. It's the sentence that the perfect man has no self, but it means more, of course we have a self, but it means that the perfect man has no thought of the self. One has a self necessarily, but one should not strive for it, one should not construct it, one should not plan it according to certain rules. Now, many traditions, and here I can compare a little to introduce something new. Many traditions say things about the self. In Hinduism, the samadhi, which is the pure consciousness without any activity, without any conscious thought activity. Here the adept would realize his real self as an identity with the Brahman. Now, as you know, Buddhism is against this. They say it's the Atman, the non-self that we should look for. But in these non-theistic religions, and then also in monotheistic mysticism, because I'm working on this now. I work on Sufism because I'm living here in this region. So in both, there is the idea to different degrees that one should transcend the self. Even the notion of ecstasis that we have in Islam, in Christianity, a little bit less in Judaism, but even there it exists. What does it mean, ecstasis? It means to stand beside yourself, to look at yourself from an outside position. And I think this is important here. Somebody who works on Arab culture, but I think it's very relevant here. He said, well, what is then the contrary of ecstasis? It is ecstasy, so ecstasy and ecstasy. This means it's a sort of introverted narcissism that you look at yourself and you are so happy that you have yourself and that it is so authentic. But you should stand outside yourself and look at yourself. So such analysis have been delivered in the context of Hinduism, which also sometimes says that one should not be, the self should not be entirely identical with the Brahman, because it would be just identical with an ideal self, then it would have no communication with other selves. It would just be locked in itself. So certainly they are attached to the Atman, but it is more complicated than that. And then Buddhism concentrates on the An-Atman, that is the no self, and says that the self, if it's identical with God through a mystical experience, I use the term God because Japanese philosophers, it's very common that they talk about God without having this creator God image in mind. So if it cannot be distinguished at all from God, then we are too much in it. So there is more the idea of an extinction, of an effacement of the self, or let's say of an emptying of the self, to use this word again. For Buddhism, of course, it means mainly extinction of all unnecessary pleasure, of pain, all these things that are attached to individual life, to our self. Buddhism may refer to nirvana. Nirvana, that means literally the blowing out of many three fires, of greed, of aversion, and of ignorance. The latter seems to be the most difficult one. You can maybe extinguish your greed and your aversions, but to extinguish your ignorance, that sounds more difficult. So this unity of the self with something higher, you can call it God, it cannot just be obtained by emptying yourself and then filling it with something else. But the idea is more that the emptying of the self deconstructs and cancels the distinction between emptiness and fullness. So the empty self is not filled with something that you think is the better self, but you abandon the distinction of a self and something ideal, and you are just acting. Or with Derrida, we could say there's not the idea of a non-present and then it has to be filled with some presence that we assume would be better. Especially Buddhism does not see sunyata, the emptiness, as a lack that needs to be filled with something, because then we would start over again, we would have the empty again. But the emptying is more the final outcome of an emptying procedure. I think in Taoism, it's similar. The Tao is not merely the fullness of a person with something better, with God, but it remains something impersonal. So it is not a form that has been filled, that has been turned into a non-form and has then to be filled again in order to be a form, but it is both form and non-form. It is emptiness and fullness. The Tao is emptiness and fullness at the same time. It is formless, it's invisible. At the same time, there is some form. So this state of mind of total self-collection within the Tao or within the sunyata, that leads to the recognition of reality. But this reality is not full of something. It is simply emptiness. It means it is not emptiness. It is emptiness of a self that no longer sees itself as opposed to a full God. So this eradication of the self can even reinforce, should not reinforce the desire for some fullness. This is why Buddhists say things like that Buddha is just broken tiles and pebbles, because if you would think that Buddha is something higher, something better, then you would strive for it, you would desire it, and you would try to shape yourself according to these new rules. And this is precisely what you should not do. Buddhism says that the sunyata cannot accommodate anything holy. We should not cling to the sunyata. We should not cling to the emptiness. They encourage the destruction of the holy, especially the Rinzai school in Japan, that was very important, just to ensure that the self will never be full, because it has a tendency to fill itself with things. Sunyata means that the self has no essence. But then again, it doesn't mean that the self should be completely abandoned. This has been criticized very much in all religions. Something is preserved. First, why should it be preserved? Is the self not simply egocentricity? Is it not just selfishness? So if we abandon the self, then that is perfect. We are the perfect man. No, it's not that simple, because the self enables a contact with the spiritual, with what Professor Chen said, the heaven. So we have the human, and the human has a self. So if the human has no self at all, there is no contact with heaven, there is no contact with God, with the spiritual. So this is important. Now, I had something here on Chen. Maybe I will skip this. It is getting too long. If Buddhism says that sunyata is the emptiness of the self, and the realization of the non-self, which is anatman, in Pali it's anatta. The Japanese call it muga, it's wubo in Chinese. It's all the same thing. Somebody said that anatta is actually a primitive version of sunyata that Mahayana Buddhism introduced, made it more sophisticated and called it sunyata. So it doesn't mean that the self has been emptied. It rather means that now no phenomenon in the whole world can be recognized as an essence, which means that even the self cannot be recognized as an essence, but it doesn't mean that we have no self. We still have a self. The notion of being as such, this idea of the self as having a substance, in the sense of being an identical, an entity that is identical with itself, and that has a ground in being itself, this idea of the self is abandoned. And I think we have this in many religions, and we have it also in Sufism, which is a monotheistic religion. We have it a little in Christianity too, with the kenosis. Within this emptiness, we recognize the true self. So the no self is not the result of a progressive purification of an individual self that moves closer and closer to some superior essence. But the dichotomy of emptiness and fullness of the self has been abandoned. Only a deluded self can think of itself as full, but only a deluded self can think of itself as empty, as opposed to fullness. The enlightened self is aware that there is only emptiness, and this awareness will lead to serenity. So this is why there is the idea of the Atman, of the inner self, or the absolute self, which is no longer a relative self. So this self, the no self, argues for complete impersonality, but still there is a self. But there should be no self-centeredness that puts forward psychological states as essences. So all these aversions and, as we said, desires, these are just psychological states, and we go beyond that. And also what will be abandoned here, I come back to PC and these things, it will also abandon the language that affirms the self, because that fills the self with language, with pronouns, for example, that confirm the self. So if there is a real self-sufficiency or a self-confidence of being, one will not fall back into this I am I, into this self-consciousness that believes that now it is exactly what it should be. And I think this is interesting in the context of Taoism, when you say there's a perfect man. Now, does the perfect man really think that now he is exactly how he should be? Does he really think that? Now, if he thinks that, there is already a mistake. He should not think that. because this would already be what some people called religious narcissism. So this ecstatic condition, I come back to that, in which one stands beside oneself. It doesn't mean that one likes oneself. One is standing beside oneself and say, oh, I like this guy very much. This happens only when the self is full, but the really empty self is not able of this self-love. When everything is seen from the point of view of an empty self, even the emptiness, and also the fullness, and God, and heaven, and the universal, then there is no self-enjoyment possible. And Buddhism does this by deconstructing the self, by saying the world is no longer divided into compartments such as I, you, me, and maybe the self that stands outside self, which is another kind of self. And it wouldn't divide the worlds into pronouns either. So I come to the conclusion from the Taoist point of view, the PC invents, political correctness invents a new self, not in order to overcome an essentialist thinking about people's selves, but it creates new essentialist selves. The roles, gender roles, for example, they are imposed by society. And when society forces us to play certain roles, such as male or female, it is true, it might prevent us from finding our true self. But it doesn't mean that we empty ourselves and that we fill it, because with what should it be filled? It would only be things that maybe narcissistically we affirm. The really empty self has no self, it is a no self. For example, if somebody invents himself a new self, he says, I'm gender fluid, then a Taoist would not insist on the male or female and would say, no, this is wrong. But he would just say that he has no real knowledge about what is the authentic male, the authentic female, and then the notion of gender fluid would no longer be necessary. And what does it mean? He has no real knowledge. He has no real knowledge about what it means in culture. In culture, we just act. We act spontaneously. We act by following some necessary rules and also contingency. So in the end, he will refuse to fill emptiness with something. And I think here Taoism comes very close to Buddhism. There is not the idea of something better, of a better self. Because how could anybody know what that is? What is the authentic gender? And this is very contemporary. If you think of complex societies like our societies that abound with slogans that always aggressively push us to find yourself, just do it, just be yourself. So they promise in this enlightenment fashion that through freedom and independence we obtain authenticity. But this supposes that we know what our self is, but in reality we don't. If there is something like authenticity, it is can only be reached by abandoning the idea of authenticity, by having this mindless mind or no self. And then you can say, just do it, but it will become something else. It will become something different. If you do things just with the no mind, then you reach, maybe you can still call it an authenticity, but it is another kind of authenticity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Botz-Bornstein. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I'll ask the fellow discussants to ask their questions.
I guess my question is very simple. If we think that chapter 2 is important, Chi Wu Lun, then one of the, I don't want to say messages, but one of the things we might take away from chapter 2 is that we are all different, but not necessarily by our own doing, or certainly not completely by our own doing. The Tao blows through us, and we cheep in a certain way if we're baby birds, and as humans we talk. And that is part of things beyond our control blowing through us. So I'm wondering whether you would agree with that characterization, because if so, are we then to act like the Tao so that other things can be themselves, somehow working in that direction? So I'm just wondering what you would think about that.
What do you mean that other things can be themselves?
Well, I think there are lines in the Zhuangzi and many other texts that describe what is magnificent about whatever we're going to call Tian. And it is that it lets things be themselves. So the sunshine you mentioned, I can see the sunshine in your picture. The sunshine shines on all equally, but not to make us all alike, but to make us all distinctively different.
Yes. I agree with this. I mean, especially this with the sun, we have that in the Bible, in Job, and there it is meant to say that humans should just accept a contingency, because Job is complaining to God, and he says, why is all this why are all the bad things happening to me? Why do you punish me? And then God says, you just shouldn't ask such questions. Do you think I reward only the good ones and I punish the bad ones? Things just happen, and you just accept them. Things are just the way they are. So humans are always looking for a reason, and that is already the mistake. So our self, they are very carefully established. We think there's a plan behind ourselves, because our whole life we are working on it, and sometimes it becomes excessive, sometimes it becomes narcissistic, but things should just be, and ourselves also should just be accepted the way they are. And we should recognize that there is a contingency that we cannot really reach. That's what
So I guess as a follow-up, and I would prefer to stay in the Zhuangzi if we can, but as a follow-up, is there a better way of acting for human beings or not, in your view?
Well, yes. Once you, I think there is an idea of purification through the emptiness, by having a certain awareness, a change of awareness, by seeing yourself not in terms of psychological states, because they will be essentialized immediately. And once you have this awareness, well, you have a better self, you act in a better way. But it's not a purification in the Platonic sense that we go through a hierarchy of a ladder of development, that we are approaching something better, a purer state that is already determined and that we know, that we can look at, and we know where we are going, and we are approaching it slowly. It is more the idea of the complete emptiness that then affects us. And I think all these religions, they say this somehow in different ways. So your question was, does it have an effect on us? Yes, it has this effect.
Thank you very much. If both speakers are content with their with their answers, maybe shall we move on to the general discussion, because we have just about time for the general discussion. Do you agree? I would like to ask Daniel Bell if he wants to turn his mic on and ask his question that he posted in the chat, or do you prefer me to read it?
Hi, I can read it. Thank you. Sorry, I'm
Hi.
in the middle of doing laundry, which unfortunately requires a lot of conscious effort. So I'm not putting my video on. So thank you so much for this. And since it's about a political Zhuangzi, so there's two historical questions. Two questions. One is historical. Basically, who were the political targets of the Zhuangzi? I mean, was it a critique of supposedly all-knowing leaders saying, actually, you shouldn't be that way, nobody can be all-knowing? And second question, it's a more normative one. What are the political implications for contemporary society? As you probably know, there's been a lot of work today on emphasizing the Zhuangzi and its implications for personal freedom. So if that's true, how would this translate into policies and laws for contemporary society, including China? Thank you.
So that's a question for all of our guests, maybe. So if you want to take turns.
I guess I don't think that the Zhuangzi says these are the enemies, but rather describes this is the world we live in, and be cognizant as you make your way through it. I think that the real problem is, what do we mean by personal freedom? I think all of us would probably come up with different definitions. I grew up in the Kentucky equivalent of a dajiating. I can't imagine going through life without thinking of others. Many people would say that is the antithesis of personal freedom. I would say others are the air I breathe. So I think the real problem in your question is, what do you mean by personal freedom? And how would you define it?
Thank you, Prof. Nylan. Maybe Professor Chen?
Okay. Thank you, Professor Bernstein's wonderful report. I have two questions. Zhuangzi's Xu has a lot to do with the concept qi, which is very different from Buddhism. Qi was important not only to Zhuangzi, but to ancient Chinese thoughts as a whole. Perhaps an important reason why Zhuangzi's philosophy cannot be fully understood as a philosophy of consciousness only is because qi cannot be equated with consciousness. I would love to hear your thoughts on qi. Another question is, what's the relationship between the concept xu and the concept of zhen authenticity in the Zhuangzi. And also, for me, Zhuangzi is 无我 is related to the use of no use, 无用之用, which manifests itself in the deconstruction of the relationship and the mechanism between the user and the object of use. My question is how do you understand the relationship between the useless use, 无用之用, and the selfless me, 无我之我? Thank you very much.
These are several questions, difficult questions. I don't know if I can answer them like this. I mean, this would be a big topic of comparative philosophy, and then compare this with Buddhism. I cannot really say that now spontaneously, also because I'm just at the moment I'm not working on Taoism. I work on something else. And then, what were your other questions? I tried to take notes, but didn't really work. What was was the other question? No. Can you just say it again?
Yes. 庄知识无我 is relative to the use of no use, 无用. So what is relationship between the useless use and the selfless me, 无用之用, 无我之我? What's the relationship between them?
Well, we have all these terms that are related to the self, as you say, the useless self. I mean, it is just this. What I said, that the self should not be seen in relationship with essences that emerge in society. So in that sense, it is the G and the Wo is useless because it should not think of itself as something that it is striving for. Does that is this what you mean by your question with these two terms?
Yes. When we say there is me, it means there is I can use something is useful. So there is identity before the me and the usefulness. So in the book of Zhuangzi, there are lots of context about the 无用之用. Yes, 无用之用. No useful, no usefulness. It also a use.
Yeah, certainly it fits into the picture, because what is a use? It's something that we establish with regard to society, but then there are essentializations that come in. So to say that it has no use, that is a consistent position.
Okay, thanks.
If I may draw your attention to the question of Daniel Bell that has not been answered completely yet. I like to also raise this part of question. Who were the political targets of the Zhuangzi? Because I think it's extremely important in this particular discussion at this roundtable. Are we talking about Zhuangzi as a speculative text that really dilutes the boundaries of the self, or is it is there a specific message directed at the specific set of addressees of readers who were the rulers, presumably? What was your?
If I could jump in one more time, one thing we forget is to ask who can be the readers of the Zhuangzi. And in the early period, that's going to be a very small proportion of the population, the members of what we might call the governing elite. That's it. And so we should presume, as I think a working principle, that these must be problems that would concern them in their daily lives as they go about their lives at court, potentially. Otherwise, I don't mean that one cannot be speculative, but I do mean that if we're talking about a political Zhuangzi, we're talking about it because no one else could read this text. It's a very difficult text. It requires high erudition, and very few people, we guesstimate at a maximum between 5 and 10% of the population could read even basic texts. So I think that's very important for us to remember and take that into account, whatever else we conclude about the text.
Thank you very much. Maybe if Professor Botz-Bornstein wants to react to this. Oh, sorry, we have a question. Sorry, Isabel,
yeah, but the enemies, I don't really see. I think this is more maybe Professor Chen can say what the enemies of Zhuangzi are here in this text.
Professor Chen, if you don't want to answer this, maybe we could take another question. Yeah, please go on.
Yes. For me, what I learned from Professor Nylan, maybe it is as distance between the ways of thinking of Zhuangzi and philosophy. Philosophy is a simple symbol of our experience and thought, a way that is Socratic and Platonic, but which indeed Zhuangzi did not adopt. Professor Bornstein's report, however, make us realize that we can use the philosophy and extend it as a symbol to interpret Zhuangzi. But in do so, we perhaps change the connotation of the philosophy as a symbol, as well as change the Zhuangzi. What I want to say, that change, this change is inevitable, maybe.
Oh, I think changes are inevitable. Yeah. If I can go back to the question of targets, I did a little bit of work on this, quite systematic work on this. And I think one thing we have discounted is how often Zhuangzi, or whatever we're calling Zhuangzi, speaks through Confucius, but very much in the same way that Xunzi might honor Confucius. Xunzi is also against the mindless followers who would identify themselves as Confucians. So the Zhuangzi is relentless, as is the Xunzi, against these followers who just do things by rote.
Thank you very much. Can we take some more questions now? We have at least two people waiting and one raising her hand. So I'll first ask Isabel, if you want to pose your question, please.
Yes, actually, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Nylan. Actually,
Hi,
I have.
Isabel's, so everyone knows this, is an expert on translations of the Zhuangzi.
No way, I'm not an expert on translation of Zhuangzi. So I've just noticed the question that we've been discussing, who are the political targets of Zhuangzi. I also want to like partially respond to that question, but also partially respond to Professor Nylan's idea that she mentioned, brought about, which is the key concept of Zhuangzi is how to keep a whole or an intact body in a politically chaotic world. Which is something I would have.
May I just say something?
Yeah.
By body, I don't mean something lesser. All of our functions are part of that body, including our most elevated thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So I absolutely agree. So in my reading of Zhuangzi, I found some pieces of evidence that is partially supporting your idea, and also partially supplementing your idea from another perspective, which it seems to form a larger picture, if I could say that, to the question of who are the political targets of Zhuangzi. So how to keep a whole body in a politically chaotic world? It seems to be Zhuangzi giving advice to us individuals. However, I found that in outer chapters of Zhuangzi, also in some of the inner chapters of Zhuangzi, it also proposed a set of or a series of suggestions to the governing body or the governing elite. For example, in the Mati of the outer chapters, they have the 至德之士, the age of the perfect virtue, where in Zhuangzi's opinion, people who are good at managing the world would not do so. And also, he mentioned the blunders of the sage, the fault of the sages, where in their efforts to achieve benevolence and righteousness, they also created suspicion and brought divisions into being. So it's kind of a misconstrued idea or a miscalculation of what should be done politically correct. So, and also there are other examples such as 明王之治 and 在有天下人, so on and so on. So my question here for Professor Nylan is that, do you deem these suggestions to the governing body as a part of political Zhuangzi, or you just think it's just for us individuals to remain safe and intact in the politically chaotic world?
I think if one reads Xunzi's Li Lun chapter, he makes it very clear, as do parts of the Zhuangzi, one cannot always refuse political office, and one relies on friends and allies and family. So thinking of the Zhuangzi as addressing individuals in the way certain people in the modern period construe themselves as divorced from family considerations, from alliances, or from multi-generational concerns, I think would be wrong. So I think Zhuangzi says, if you're in this political elite, you may or may not be tapped But if you are tapped, you will need all the help you can get in the form of friends, alliances, and all of this. And if you are so unlucky as to lose your life, there are better ways to lose your life that will not harm your friends and family. And so I think I don't see these as segmented boxes in the early period. So I think it's a great question. And I think it's a relevant question to the modern world as we become nominally more interconnected, but in some ways more combative and fragmented from each other. How do we do a better job of keeping ourselves whole and intact? And I mean emotionally, physically, spiritually, anyway. How do we go through life to accomplish this? Not easy.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Raj. Can I now ask Professor Esther Klein whether she has a question, or?
I do have a question.
Okay.
So the title of this roundtable was the Political Zhuangzi, and I guess one of the things that surprised me was many of the passages that I think of as very political did not come up. And so, but I mean, I don't want to kind of drag it into a different direction, but a little bit following on Professor Nylan's observation that there are very few passages of the Zhuangzi that get mentioned all the time, and many passages that are somewhat less current. Professor Chen brought up one that I particularly like about the Hanin Jun, who sort of says, you don't want to have a machine heart, right? And that one I do think of as very politically relevant to today, although I'm not positive I know what the message is there. But I guess I wondered if any of the panel members might want to comment on some of the passages in, say, the Tian chapters in the Waipian. So, like, I guess one of the things that has struck me when I read those chapters is that they're much more conventional. Not totally, so sure. But
Wang Shuming doesn't agree with you.
Maybe not. But I mean, at least they're kind of, I feel like they're having more like the same conversation, whereas some of the Napian are just like in a completely different conversation at some times. Whereas I think, say Tiandi, where he says that the filial son who does not flatter his father, the Xiaozi, and the loyal minister who doesn't, flatter his ruler. Those are the best things. And this kind of conversation, I just feel like that's, to me, that's a little bit, it's interesting, and it's not totally old hat, but I just wondered if you see moments where instead of the radical Zhuangzi, I'm just kind of more curious about the less radical Zhuangzi, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I think of, and I mentioned the Shanmu chapter, there's a wonderful thing there that is playing with the utility of the useless. And a disciple is saying, hey, you told me this, but now you tell me the opposite, and this doesn't work. And Zhuangzi basically says, go figure. There is no answer here. There are no rules. I can spout dicta, but that's not going to help you get through real life. I think that's a highly political message. And I would only quibble with you by saying, I think really there are equally good passages in the Waipian and the Zapian. And that's what Wang Shuming says when he begins his study of the Zhuangzi. So I think we all have our favorites. But I'll stop there. But I don't I'm not quite sure where you want to take that, but I'll stop there. Others may wish to speak to that. Yeah.
I definitely wasn't casting aspersions on the quality of the Waipian or the Zapian.
Does anyone of the other speakers want to react to this? Maybe to Esther Klein's comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So please pose your question.
Yes, hello. I also would like to respond something to Daniel's questions. The first one, I noticed that he asked who were the political targets of the Zhuangzi. So I think if it is a person what Zhuangzi want to propose something to, I think that might be the monarch, the governor, because we all know that Zhuangzi has the inner sage and elder king nationwide one's thought. And beside that, I think if the who it talks about maybe a sphere or maybe a realm, I think that might be what Elisabetta, right? Elisabetta said that before. It is the most virtuous age, 智德之士, because I think we should notice that what Zhuangzi talks about, the background of Zhuangzi's argument is 世道交丧, the word and Dao, they lost each other. So what Zhuangzi wants to go back to the virtuous world, the most virtuous world. So I think if the question about Daniel, the who might be the person, might be the sage king. But if not a person, it will be go back to the 智德之士. That's what I thought. And I also have another question. My question is, could Zhuangzi's individual realm of freedom become the freedom in the social political realm? Because I think we also think that, but I also think that the freedom here we should make a definition. So what kind of freedom Zhuangzi talks about? Because we all know that freedom is a modern concept. It is not what Zhuangzi proposed in his original work. So I think whether Zhuangzi's freedom, the individual freedom, could expand to the social political world's freedom. So that is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want any particular guest to answer your question, or do you just leave it out there?
Maybe Prof. Botz-Bornstein. Thank you.
With freedom, of course, it has to be political. Though if what they meant at that time by political is not what we mean by political, we always have to consider that. But I think some conditions are similar. So when you say should this freedom and this space, would it also be integrated into the political space? Most generally, yes. I think otherwise it's not just for the individual. It's not just individual freedom. It's always a critique of society, and it is a political writing. I think in general.
So whether you think there is political philosophy in Zhuangzi's context or in the Zhuangzi?
Absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. I mean, that is the idea. The find political themes in there, and I think it's quite obvious.
But I think political thought might be different from political philosophy. So what I try to find out is whether there is political philosophy in the Zhuangzi.
Aren't we hair splitting again? Meaning, if it's about politics, we could call it theory, we could call it thought, we could call it philosophy, but does it get us any further in thinking about the Zhuangzi? I don't think so. So the first thing I think of might be butcher ding. There are ways to maneuver when we don't, they're not entirely obvious. And we should learn how we can maneuver in tight situations. But I think there are many other political lessons here. I like to think of these texts as teachings. Then we get past this silly division between philosophy and thinking and thought.
I really hate to interrupt this interesting discussion. We could pose more questions, but as I see the sun rising behind Professor Botz-Bornstein over the Gulf in his office, I think we should really wrap things up. And I'll thank you very much. I think to the guests for their speeches, and thanks to all who listened, regardless of their time zone. And thank you to Paul D'Ambrosio for organizing this. Thank you very much.
When we quit the recording, could I thank you? Unofficially. Thank you.